Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show. This week on the podcast, I'm joined by Lucy Sorrentini, who is founder and CEO of Impact Consulting, LLC. It's a certified minority and women-owned management consulting firm that specializes in talent and organizational development, diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting, leadership development, etc. Lucy is a wonderful, wonderful human being. I am privileged to call her a friend. We talk about Hispanic Heritage Month and how to celebrate. We talk about her career journey and resources that she provides for our listeners to capitalize on her formula for getting in the driver's seat for your career. So much good nuggets in this episode. I know that you will enjoy this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Let us get right into the conversation. Lucy Sorrentini, it is so exciting to have you on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I am such a fan ever since the first day we met. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Simone. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. So it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and do you have, kind of like a celebration? How do you celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month?
So thank you for acknowledging that. So I would say I celebrate it all the time. And so I sit here and I smile because I think, I look forward to the October 15th celebration, the kickoff. The reality for us, we're celebrating Hispanic heritage all the time. And so for me, what Hispanic heritage creates is sort of this incredible time to really reflect and think about who we are as a people, what we contribute to society, what we contribute in our businesses. And so from a company perspective, we do a lot around Hispanic heritage, and personally as a family, we go out of our way to acknowledge Hispanic Heritage Month by supporting other small businesses, restaurants that we go to, movies that we watch, cultural things that we talk about as a family as well.
Oh, what's a good movie? I've got to ask so that I can.
I mean, there's so many. So this is funny. So I am a big Selena fan, and so that story, while tragic, right, just so incredible from the perspective of a young girl having an amazing dream, and so the tragedy of that life, but the beauty of what that life has done to so many other young girls that are following in her footsteps, that are now sort of living a different dream because they believed and they saw that somebody was able to do it. And so that story and that movie is one that I watch every year during Hispanic Heritage Month, sort of as my own tradition. And I'm a big J.Lo fan also, so to watch Jennifer Lopez in that, incredible starring role is really amazing as well.
She did a phenomenal job. I love Selena too, by the way, and I saw it, and man, I felt like Jennifer Lopez was Selena. She looks so much like her.
Big time. And so her study for that role and her getting into the embodiment of the role. And I know there was even some pushback initially, right? Because she's not Mexican. She instead is a Puerto Rican woman, as I am. And so there was some pushback around, couldn't we find a Mexican or Mexican-American actress to play the role? And I think after she performed it, there was very little question, right? As to why they chose her. She was just phenomenal.
It's so interesting, the parallel in terms of cultures, being a woman of color, and me hearing you talk about, I celebrate Hispanic heritage every day. I celebrate being a Black woman every day and not just Black History Month, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
even the comment about Jennifer Lopez makes me think about Zoe Saldana playing Nina Simone and the pushback in terms of her skin color and her being not
Exactly.
dark enough to play. So, there are so many parallels between cultures. And I know you're in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space as well. So take us on your career journey. Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, it's so interesting. So I was reflecting on that and thinking about sort of my career, where it was and where it started, 20 plus 25 years ago and where I am today, right? And so what do I know? Going back, I've always had a love for business. I grew up, I'm the youngest of seven. My parents had a bodega business in the Bronx in New York. And so I grew up very much this latchkey kid, but knowing the business, stopping by the grocery store, learning to work with money in the cash register when I was 4 or 5 years old. Very cool. So I was always fascinated with business. And at the same time, though, I always had a passion for people and problem solving and helping individuals with, their issues and their problems, and younger even, being the youngest in the family, but oftentimes being the role model, the mentor, the ones that individuals would come to, right, to help them figure things out. And so as I went to undergrad, I pursued a degree in psychology and business, and ultimately graduated a dual major. But at that time, I was actually discouraged from pursuing my advanced degree in psychology, mainly because I was told I was too sensitive. So it was interesting. I'm too sensitive, and that I'd have to recognize that was going to be a big feat to take on. I moved into the business world, loved everything about business, but always felt that my heart was sort of with the people, whatever that meant for me, right? Helping others. And so I stumbled upon this career in HR, which at the time wasn't this sexy career that we talk about today. It really wasn't strategic. It was just, it was a role in HR. But landing in that role made me recognize that this world of business and human capital and human resources could coexist. And so for me, that was my entree into this space and into this world. And so then as I fast forwarded and I had different roles and different jobs, and they became more and more strategic as my career trajectory obviously continued to expand and grow and roll in scope. My latest and most amazing role was as chief diversity officer, right, of a large global consultancy, where I came to a place of, oh my gosh, my life has come full circle. I'm able to really work on and be a part of something really, really big and really important, and something that very specifically addressed everything that I was passionate about. I was passionate about business, and I was in consulting, helping organizations solve some of the most critical business issues, right? I was on the human resources, human capital side, and so I had the benefit and the privilege of working with individuals of all backgrounds, all cultures, every day, on all different sorts of, both business and personal issues. Because as human beings, right, we're professionals, but we're human beings first. And so I had that, opportunity. And then being in this space of global consulting, the multicultural aspect of who we are and how we show up. And so this, starting and going back to, business versus human resources, what naturally evolved for me was this evolution of, yeah, they can coexist. And when they do, it's pretty powerful.
You said so many good things that I want to connect about. First of all, I'm the youngest of 6.
Oh, so you can relate.
Kudos to you, and the comment that you made about being the go-to person for mentoring, etc. I totally related to that. So just wanted to drop that out there. And
That's great.
Then, the feedback that we get on careers that we choose is so interesting and impactful. I remember being a young girl and saying that I wanted to be a teacher and getting, that's not a good career for you. There's no money in that. And I'm like, pivot. And now as I think about the fact that I pivoted and went down a completely different route, I came right back around to teaching as a part of what I do today, and it has showed up many times in my career. So I find it interesting as you talk about the psychology that it ended up coming right back around anyway.
Isn't that amazing? That was your destiny, right? And it shows up. We call it one thing. It actually shows up in so many different ways. Absolutely.
Well, so Lucy, what made you decide to step away and take a risk in terms of being an entrepreneur? So you found this sweet spot where you're tapping into your talents, you're working with people that you love, the different cultures, and learning and growing. What made you decide to step away from that and start your own thing?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So you mentioned the word pivot, right? So biggest pivot of my life was when I left corporate to pursue this path of entrepreneurship. And I think for me, deep down inside, I've always felt that I was an entrepreneur, right? I grew up in this environment really young, but this is what I experienced. This is what I saw. You know, you worked really hard and you built something. You built something with your own two hands and you put in a certain level of effort. And ultimately that level of effort would allow you to realize, right, the gain on the other end, but you had almost full control over that, or maximum control, I should say, over that. And so for me, I had reached a point in my career where I loved everything I was doing. So again, I'm in a very similar role now, right? I'm doing it for myself, but the job in and of itself and the career in and of itself is very, very similar. I think for me, I was at a stage in my life where I knew that entrepreneurship fits somewhere in my career trajectory. And it was more the question of, if not now, then when? And so from a personal perspective, at the time that I made my decision, my sons were 17 and, I gotta do the numbers now, 17 and 14. And so I knew that it was only a matter of years before they'd both be going off to college. And as we all know, those of us that have corporate careers and even entrepreneurs, when you're moms or dads, right, single parents or married, there's just a lot of responsibility with juggling both being a parent and being a business owner and or a career professional. And so for me, I thought, hey, this might be an opportunity to have a little bit more flexibility. At the same time, to get back to building something that I could really be proud of, that would be sort of a legacy that would sort of live on beyond myself. And so taking all the amazing experience, taking all the knowledge that I gained, you know, all the amazing relationships that I brought with me, it just felt like the right time. It felt like the right time to step out and be a little bit bold and just make that career move. And so that was it. That was 5 years ago, Simone, this past April. So I'm super excited that we just celebrated our 5th anniversary as a company.
Awesome. Awesome. So what would you say is the formula for successfully owning your career? You've been on the corporate side and on the entrepreneur side, putting together. What's the secret sauce?
Oh my gosh, it's so different for everybody, right? Resilience comes up when you ask that question. And so that's what comes up for me almost immediately. I mean, I think if I even go back a step, I think having clarity, right, around the what you want and why you want it is, to me, really important. And so I mentioned early on that I knew I wanted to be in business, but I also knew I wanted to help people. And then, so that created a certain element of clarity around what I would be doing in the future. And then there was a second piece around, why do I want that? And so there were sort of the mechanics of, well, obviously I want to build, right? I want to build financial freedom. I want to be able to be independent. So from a financial and business side, these are the things that I want. But I want to grow. I want to develop. I want to learn new things. I want to help individuals progress in their careers. I want to help organizations be better. You know, and the why do I want to do that? Because quite frankly, we spend a lot of time at work.
Yes.
You know, whether we're working for ourselves or whether we're working for organizations, we spend so much time at work. So why shouldn't we all play a role in making that experience better, right? So that was my why. My why was, I want to make the experience better for other people. You know, you started this conversation about Hispanic heritage, you know, really looking at the opportunities that I was afforded, that maybe my sisters who were older than me were not afforded, and knowing that I could do something to change that trajectory for other people was incredibly, incredibly inspiring for me. So I would start first from the know what you want as part of the secret sauce, but even more importantly, know why you want it. And then do everything you can, you know, exert every level of energy, muscle, and power to make it happen. That resilience piece is no joke. I mean, I thought that I worked really hard when I was in corporate, and I'm sure I did. I worked incredibly hard. I worked long hours. I traveled a ton. I struggled with sort of balancing work life and sometimes really thinking about, is it worth it? Because it's this challenge of needing to be everywhere and needing to show up for everyone, and really sometimes forgetting, right, oneself. In my case, putting myself second maybe more times than I should have. When I thought about being an entrepreneur, I thought, well, this will give me flexibility. Well, the joke was on me, right? Yes, it did. Yes, it did on one end. But the reality is that that this has been the hardest thing for me, but the most rewarding career decision of my life. I just, I could not be any more blessed and any happier, but it does take a ton of resilience to wake up every day and know that you're going to continue forward in building something great, because that why, that why has become my North Star.
Yes.
That why is so important, that failure is not an option and not showing up is not an option.
Wonderful, wonderful. I hope everyone is taking notes. It's so true. I'm nodding my head as Lucy is speaking because I've had the corporate experience and I have the entrepreneurship experience. And so you don't work less as an entrepreneur
at all.
There is so
Right.
much effort, and the word that was popping into my mind was grit. As you're talking about resilience, to
Absolutely.
really stay the course for what you believe in. So absolutely. Are there resources that you have found, Lucy, books, podcasts, training, etc., resources that you have found to be helpful to you in terms of growing in your career?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting. I'm relatively new to podcasts. And it's fascinating to me because now that I've tuned in and turned on to podcasts, I can't stop, right? So I love the work of Simon Sinek, and I typically leverage his materials even before, when it wasn't podcast, it was reading as a resource. So for me, that's one that I would say is a top resource. The work of Shawn Achor, which is focused on happiness and sort of being whole and just showing up your best self all the time, is another. I've just tuned in your podcast and I love it. I figured I would make myself smarter being a featured guest, and I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, listening to some of the other voices, how much we all have in common, right? And how much we can all support one another. And so that, from a podcast perspective, those would be, three of the podcasts that come to mind. I mean, there are other individuals in the diversity space, Jennifer Brown Consulting and others that are amazing as well, that I've listened to. I think resources more broadly, though, I'll mention a few. A mentor and or a sponsor, ideally both, right? Yes, and critically important for one's career, and critically important to spend some time thinking about, because your career trajectory is going to change over time, right? As you progress in life stages, you're going to begin to think about things differently, and your needs for your career are different. And so for me, having multiple mentors throughout your career stages is critically important, and identifying a mentor and or a sponsor that can really help you in both serving as a sounding board, but also providing advice, providing guidance, opening up their own networks, working with you maybe during some of those times where those are critical decisions that you have to make in your career. So the role of a mentor, the role of a sponsor, I think, are incredible resources for any career professional. I would also say professional associations and affiliations. So when I think about, for us, human capital individuals, yourself and I, the Society for Human Resource Management, right? Huge resource from a business development perspective, huge resource from an organizational development perspective. There are other organizations like the Center for Creative Leadership that I'm connected with. So I think it's really important that as an individual, we all think about what are those appropriate resources, but we also create the space to know that those will change over time, right? Based on our needs, they need to change. And so for me, the mentor relationship, critically important. The sponsor relationship, critically important. The professional networks that you show up in and where you engage, important. The readings, the podcasts. Always keep yourself current is one thing I will say. Yesterday was yesterday for a reason, and today is a new day. And so what I am finding in my business, and we work with our clients all the time on this, is that, what we deployed just a week ago that worked really well likely will need to be adjusted or changed. And we know this now in this COVID environment, right? What are we seeing? We entered the new year very differently from where we sit today. And so the speed of change is critical, and it's going to happen with or without us. And so any opportunity to be ahead of that is a strong recommendation I would put out there to anybody listening as well.
Oh, so many solid nuggets. So
I
many.
feel like I just want to talk. So you've got to stop me.
You see, this podcast should be an hour. Yes, yes. When I think about the mentor sponsor concept, I remember my corporate days and not really understanding early on, because culturally, this is not cultural conversation. I learned a lot outside of the home. I learned a lot at home, but I learned a lot outside of the home as well. And when you talk about things like sponsorship and the importance of it, a lot of people don't know about sponsor. They know about mentor, but they don't get the sponsor concept. And so I'm glad that you brought that up again and talked about the importance or the criticality of that role in your network. The other thing that I noticed was the strategy, the ability to think through, what do I need to learn, who do I need to partner with, just being strategic about advancing in your career.
And adjusting that strategy, right? So no different than for us that are business owners, right? We have a business strategy, a business plan. And the thought is, once you create it, it doesn't mean that's the plan you stick with forever. You're reviewing it, you're updating it at a minimum once a year. And the same for a career strategy or career plan, once a year. I do want to also mention one other resources where we talked about sponsorship. So the Center for Talent Innovation, the work of Sylvia Hewlett, is also an incredible resource for anything around career, and in particular sponsorship and mentorship. So that would be another resource I would point to your podcast followers as well.
Yeah, I got the pleasure of seeing her speak a couple years ago, and she is a powerhouse. I just was floored. I mean, I really enjoyed hearing her speak as well. So I think that's a great resource. If you were to title your body of work, Lucy, what would the title of the book be?
Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. I've gone back and forth with this, so I want to pause and I want to be a bit thoughtful. But there's two titles that I've been thinking about as I am actually going to write a book this year. But one is about leadership insights from women like me, and it's so interesting that you and I are talking about this, right? This topic today, and leadership insights from women like me, with this focus that there are these women that we hear about, right? The big personalities, those that have really created these monumental historical changes over time that are noteworthy, that are newsworthy, that we should know about. And then there are women just like you and I that are making changes every single day. And many of the listeners on this podcast, and we learn so much more in some cases from these women, and we don't talk about it, we don't share it as often as we should. And so the thinking behind that would be, leadership insights from women like me, because I have learned so much from so many incredible women. And they're not names that you or any of your readers might know about, but they are names that have influenced my life and my world so deeply that I want to make sure that I share some of those pearls of wisdom with everybody else.
I love that. This is kind of what this podcast is about.
Absolutely.
It's sharing the wisdom, and it is amazing. We're on season 5, Lucy, and the commonality.
Congratulations.
Thank
Excellent.
you. The commonality and the differences that people share in advancing in their careers is so exciting and informative. I feel like I'm being poured into consistently. It's like professional development as I have the conversation. I'm like, yeah, that's a really good idea. Or, oh, that's a new one. Let me write that down.
Right.
Especially from a resource standpoint. I always get a lot of good book recommendations and just organizations and associations like you were talking about. So thank you for that.
Of course. And thank you for this work. This is amazing work. So again, I'm thrilled to be on with you. And I think, as I was talking about the title, I was smiling because I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? Right? This leadership insight. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you know you were in the driver's seat? As we begin to wrap up, let me ask you, when did you know you were in the driver's seat for your career?
I'm going to say it's so interesting. So twice in my life. So the first time I was probably in my mid-20s when I chose to redirect my business education and my business career towards something that was more focused on human capital. And I made the decision at a point in time where all of my colleagues and counterparts who had received their MBAs and had gotten their business degrees were following more of the traditional finance track. And I almost felt like the outlier and the outsider, quite frankly. But I thought this felt right to me. So there was this connection, me to me, very much it's important to me to follow this track. And it feels different and it feels a little uncomfortable and it almost seems a little odd because nobody else is going there, but I'm going to go there because it's important for me to be true to me. So I would say that was the first time. And I would say the second time, for very similar reasons, was when I started my business. When I moved from corporate to entrepreneurship, again, it was very non-traditional. I had many leaders, many colleagues, many friends, sponsors, mentors that actually said, are you crazy? What do you mean? At this stage of your career, are you really willing to risk it all? And again, I went back to, if not now, then when, right? If not, it feels right. I've got to have faith that it's right. And like I said, the best decision ever. So for me, those two main pivots and being able to be true to self were the times that I have felt most in the driver's seat of my career.
Love that. If there was one nugget that you wanted our listeners to take from this conversation, one piece of career advice that you'd want them to take, what would it be?
I would say plow through the fear. You know what? Get to the other side. It's there for all of us, but the other side is so much greater and so much more powerful that I think if you plow through it, if you get through it, if you sort of put fear in its place, you will realize and achieve amazing, amazing things. And I think you will broaden your definition of success in ways that you never realized or thought were possible.
Wonderful. What a wonderful interview. I hope you all agree. This has been amazing. Lucy, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
You were awesome, Simone. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Please tell our listeners, if they want to stay connected with you, how they can do so.
Of course, via LinkedIn, or if you go to our website, impactconsultingus.com. But via LinkedIn, and I'm constantly posting, and I would love to connect with your listeners, either on our Impact Consulting Us page or at Lucy Sorrentini at LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Simone, and thank you for all the great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or two about it.